Okay, let's talk about containment. Welcome to our next new setting, the secret teacher's room. So, Cold War, one of our big plans is containment. We have to do what's necessary to keep communism where it is. And we get this concept of containment from a lot of different places, but it's usually credited as being developed by the Secretary of State George Marshall, along with Undersecretary Dean Acheson and the Soviet diplomat George Kennan. And the theory behind containment is that appeasement didn't work during World War II. So we are going to try a different approach to make sure things don't get out of hand. And according to George Kennan, who had written this report as Agent X, he says that the Soviets are coming and communism is coming for all of us, and the U.S. must be vigilant. But you must also be patient and firm, like a good parent, right? You gotta be vigilant, patient, and firm. We, the U.S., must act as a counterweight to Soviet expansion, and the U.S. must be the watchdog of the world. We've given ourselves a very important title right there. And the only way we can be the watchdog of the world is if we, as the US, are willing to be involved in international peacekeeping. Because the only way to prevent the spread of communism is to be the international peacekeepers of the world. And containing communism behind the Iron Curtain is what we're all about. And so this is a massive shift in our foreign policy. We had started our country with isolationism. George Washington himself in his farewell address had told us, don't get involved in foreign affairs. It's not our business. Stay out of it. We stayed isolated in World War I. We tried isolationism in World War II as well. And in between World War I and World War II, we had this concept of internationalism, where we worked collectively with other nations to keep the peace with each other. But 1945, the end of World War II, the beginning of the Cold War, all of that is gone. We have a brand new foreign policy called globalism. And we, again, the US, we are going to be the watchdog of the world. We are going to be the international peacekeepers of communism. And this policy of containment is put to the test almost immediately in 1947, when the Soviet Union tries to expand its borders and its control down into Greece and Turkey. Now, the US, not thrilled about this. Greece and Turkey, probably not thrilled about this either. And so President Truman takes a stand here. He says, we are in charge. We are containing communism. We are the watchdogs of the world. It is our duty to help other people out. And so he issues the Truman Doctrine. Now, we had the Monroe Doctrine back in Unit 3, which tells Western Europe to stay out of our hemisphere. We had the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, where we deal with South America. We have dollar diplomacy down in South America. And now we've got the Truman Doctrine. And what the Truman Doctrine does is claims that it is the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities by outside pressures. And in order to support free people who are resisting attempted subjugation, we are going to do what any good country would do, and we are going to send them military supplies and economic aid. And so under the Truman Doctrine, we send $400 million in military and economic aid to Greece and Turkey to help resist subjugation by armed minorities or outside pressures. And I think it's really important to remember the Truman Doctrine as we get deeper into the Cold War and countries start to resist colonizing and try to decolonize from their colonizers. And the U.S. does not seem to understand that in a lot of places, we are the armed minorities and outside forces that are subjugating people, and they are trying to resist us. So they're essentially enacting their own Truman Doctrine on us, and the U.S. isn't going to take that very well. However, this does lead us to a couple of alliance systems. So we are the watchdogs of the world, but we can't do it alone, right? Nobody does it all alone, although we do think we can. Europe is in shambles. They need to rebuild. And the US especially is concerned that if Europe does not get help to rebuild, that they will fall to communism. So it is going to be the US's job to also provide aid to Europe in order to fight hunger, poverty, desperation, and chaos, and make sure that they don't fall to communism. And so we come up with this plan called the Marshall Plan, and it is the US providing aid to rebuild Europe. And so we're going to give aid to Western European countries so they can rebuild themselves after all the mess of World War II. So from 1948 to 1952, under the Marshall Plan, we are going to provide $13 billion in aid to Western Europe. And we're not really asking for much. We're just going to leverage this with this concept of an alliance system. And so while we are providing aid, we are going to also introduce the idea of an alliance system that will ensure the safety of Western Europe and all these countries. It's called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. And the goal of NATO is to unify and strengthen the Western allies with a defensive military strategy in case the Soviets decide to invade. Now, treaties are entered willingly by the North Atlantic countries of Western Europe and North America, but it may be they're entered willingly because we're giving them money. And also important to note that the money that is given to the Marshall Plan to go to Europe to rebuild is coming from the American taxpayers. And so the American taxpayers are paying extra taxes to send to the federal government so the federal government can send that money to Western Europe so they can rebuild to prevent communism from coming to America. And then in 1955, the Soviet Union responds to NATO with their own treaty system, their own alliance system called the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact is a pact between the Soviets and the other communist countries in Eastern Europe. The real difference between NATO and the Warsaw Pact is that the Eastern European countries do not have a choice. The satellite states of the Soviet Union, any communist country of Eastern Europe, is officially entered into the Warsaw Pact, whether they want to be or not. And their goal is the exact opposite of NATO. They are going to work together to prevent capitalist countries from invading and overriding communism. So our foreign policy at the beginning of the Cold War and into the 1950s is a policy of containment, and we're going to use money and we're going to make alliances to contain this stuff, but we're not going to deal with actual fighting it. However, that will all change very quickly as things start to fall apart.